Well, thank you for inviting us down here. I'm from Chicago, and Aman's from Boston, so the temperature is not as warm as it's out here. So we've been really enjoying it. So what I wanted to share with you is what I call what's the big deal with the Big Bang disruption, okay? So about 10 years ago, I started to do a lot of work with a big software company in Seattle that was struggling with three things. One is everybody's talking about the cloud. So this is 10 years ago. Everybody's talking about the cloud, and we're in the software business. What does this mean to us? Another area was we have the choicest piece of these PCs, this operating system. So why do we even, I see all these companies that are trying to drive towards creating devices. Should we participate in the device market, or should we just continue to sell this, piece? So it's kind of like, what's with this mobile device stuff? And the third thing was, with the explosion with low-cost analytical engines and Hadoop, how should we think about all this analytics? So this is before everyone was talking about big data and mobility and cloud. So this is 10 years ago. So we did a lot of work with them to try to understand, what was happening in the industry, how that's impacting the way people are buying and using things, and what that means for companies in terms of going to market, business models, and so forth. So we were exploring a lot of that stuff with them. So that was the interesting thing. About 2 years ago, there was a Harvard Business Review article called The Big Bang Disruption, okay? That kind of codified what was happening. So this is like 80 years of this work, and this article comes out. It's like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're doing, But essentially what they were saying is that if you guys are familiar with Christensen, the innovator's dilemma, the concept there is that the low-cost provider, even if the functionality isn't good, if you introduce a product, over decades, you'll take over the market. Because what the low-cost product will do is it will expand the market, and you'll actually start to displace the people. You saw that with the Japanese in the automotive industry. You saw it all over the place. So Christensen kind of codified that. So what this new article 2 years ago basically said was, so with the convergence of three major trends, the movement towards cloud, the movement towards mobile devices, and then analytics, what was happening was industry disruptions were happening in years, not decades. So everybody's going like, whoa. So I don't have tens of years to handle this. It's happening within years. And you saw that in a number of different ways. I mean, first you had the iPhone, right? And then all of a sudden you got the camera. And then within a couple of years, all the camera companies were struggling. So as this low-cost, phone with, well, it's not low cost, but with the camera being added, it was disrupting the high-end camera, and they're starting to move up higher and higher, and then all of a sudden the market was changing. It was also happening with GPS. Before you had TomTom, Garmin, these were billion-dollar companies. Now you've got GPS in your phone, you have to buy anything. Major disruption. So a lot of things were getting disrupted. So that was the first thing. So it's really relevant, and it's getting, so it's impacting our world today. So it's actually impacting our world in three ways, okay? The first is industry structure. So if you guys, I'm assuming all of you guys have some interest in business, right? So whatever role you have in business, the good news and the bad news is where your place in the industry is not static anymore, okay? So you might be a hardware provider, and historically it's being commoditized. All of a sudden, EMC is a prime example. All of a sudden, they started to go into full stack. So these industry boundaries are changing. So companies that were in more disadvantaged position, if they took the initiative to take the first move forward, they had the ability to redefine the industry. But you have to think in terms of these three areas and kind of the model of disruption. So that's the first thing. Industry structures are changing, so you can take advantage of that. Here's the other thing. So when you think about cloud, so what's so cool about the cloud? The coolest thing about the cloud is that you actually get a solution, and you can pay it on a consumption basis, okay? So those are probably big consulting words, right? So basically what it means is, I want to create a Salesforce automation product. In the old days, what you have to do is you have to build out a system integrated, you have to customize or whatever. Now Salesforce.com or GetBase or a lot of these Salesforce things, boom, on the phone, it's great. Consumption basis, I pay on a monthly rate. In fact, if I don't want it, I can try it out for free for a while, okay? So the barriers to trial and barriers to getting these solutions have been dropped. So what does that mean in terms of industry structure? So this is the part that's really interesting. What happens is when that happens, it becomes a winner-take-all industry. Because in the old days, when you had to sit there and go, I need to build something, if I need to change it, I'm like, I spent so much money, I don't want to change it. Now I'm like, yeah, I could try this out for free. If I don't like it, I can stop next month. Try this out for free. If I don't like it, I can next month. So what that means is, if you look at almost every category, within 2 to 3 years, it's like the one leader in that category takes up 80, 90% of the market share, right? So usually what happens, you got a category, you got tons of people playing. In a couple of years, you got one leader and then maybe 2 or 3 kind of secondary players. It's scary, but it's winner take all. Because once everybody says, this is the best product at the best price, guess what? With the knowledge and the cost and reduced barrier, everybody goes to that. So that's how quickly industry structures are changing. So the second thing is, how does that impact the buyers? So it impacts the buyers differently from a consumer side and the business side, okay? So the most important thing is, as these industries change and these consumers change and what you have available to change, not only does it change how you get the stuff, it actually impacts your personal patterns of life, which is really interesting, okay? Because now I've got this mobile device, I can go shopping and so forth, and one of the biggest indications of shifts in patterns of life. Look at Christmas shopping 3 years ago, just 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they're talking about mobile, it was m-commerce. Mobile commerce, hey, it's going to take 10 years, it's going to grow, blah, 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 right? By the second year, the mobile commerce went up to like, I forget, it was like 60%. Now it's like 70%. The strangest thing is, I went to Christmas shopping this year because I like to kind of walk around the malls just to see where things are and so forth. There's nobody there. Because, your son, your daughter, your girlfriend, whatever says, I want something, you're like, great. Best price, boom, order it. I don't want to search around for the stuff. I can search, buy, and it's all done. So that has a huge impact. I'm walking and talking to people, and they're like, oh, yeah. So it changes our patterns of life. Now, in fact, those patterns of life can get accelerated because, there are marketeers that can actually look at your patterns of life, look at your unique mobile ID phones. They can track how you're going. They can actually see how their marketing affects the way you change. And in fact, the other thing about changing the patterns of life and being able to be targeted on a mobile basis, there's this whole concept, price elasticity. Everybody's like, oh, I understand price elasticity. Now there's another dimension in terms of price elasticity. That dimension is how close you are. So here's the thing, you're watching TV and you see a Domino's pizza thing and say, 2 for 1 pizza, whatever, right? You get a yield of maybe 5 people that'll get in their car and go get it or call somebody. You're right next to a Domino's pizza. The phone knows that, okay? If you offer them a 10% discount, that might be enough. So you don't have to discount as much because now you know that that person's right there. Or you're grocery shopping and there's a red box right there. You can just say, hey, we know you're shopping. We'll give you 10% off in your next red box. Or you get 3 movies, you get a price of 2. So you don't have to be as aggressive discounting. So that's another concept that happens in terms of patterns of life. So these big bang disruptions is actually changing how people research, buy, and use products, okay? So now that impacts companies. So what does that do? So it changes how you market. It changes how you sell. It changes how you develop products. One of the most interesting thing is that in the old days, it's kind of funny. A lot of when they talk online and digital, they're still thinking broadcast, broadcast, broadcast. But everybody knows the best way that people actually buy product is peer-to-peer reviews or influences. Your brother, your best friend said, hey, I just saw this cool new shirt. It's a new jacket, and guess what? I can work out in it, and it's fresh. I'm like, oh, cool. I'll buy one. So peer-to-peer influencing is so important, but people are still broadcasting, right? So there's just different models in terms of creating advocacy communities, influencer channels, and so forth, and taking advantage of that. So that's the first one. That's the first thing. The second thing is, as things go more and more digital, the linkage between awareness, marketing, intent to purchase has collapsed and accelerated. You're seeing that in Christmas. You're going, boom, hey, I saw this new blah, blah, blah thing that's really cool. This hoverboard with, with a Bluetooth thing that, has this new speaker. I want one. I don't want a standard hoverboard. I want one with a big speaker in it, right? Boom, I look at it. Oh, cool. Okay, check a couple of prices. All right, boom. I ordered it for him, So I go from awareness, peer-to-peer thing, influence, to research, to purchase in like seconds. Okay? So now businesses have to change the way they think about marketing and sales. It's not two separate departments. PR, marketing, sales, historically PR, let's talk about how great our brand is, whatever. Marketing, let's tell about our brand name and let's do these promotions and so forth. Sales, let's close the deal. And that's all collapsed. They need to integrate it. So there's a concept called inbound connected sales and marketing that becomes really important. You need to connect it all together so you can figure out how to reduce the friction and get it all moving. Okay? So the last part. So what does that mean for companies? Okay? If you are a multi-billion-dollar company, there's in technology, almost any industry, because you're either a technology company or you're technology enabled, the probability that you'll get disrupted is very high. So if you're a big company, you better understand the trends and you better understand how to take advantage of this disruption, either as an opportunity or a threat. You need to address that, right? On the other hand, if you're the innovator and you see that there's a market ripe for disruption, it's a huge opportunity. I mean, there's tools out there, there's a lot of things that are out there that makes that opportunity just realizable, much faster and bigger than it was before. Okay? So with that, I'm going to turn you over to Aman, who's going to talk about why is the timing right now.
Thanks so much. Can we give Charles a hand? We debated who would go first, and I think I lost that battle because now I got to follow him. So yeah, echoing first, I think thanks so much to Manny and Sophia, to the Founders Institute. This is such a good excuse to leave Boston. I took the red eye in last night, and as you might be able to tell by my hot coffee and warm vest, that I'm still thawing out a little bit, so easing in, but I'll get there. Really excited to have everybody here and get the chance to kind of share with you what we're doing. Much like Charles said, what I want to share with you a little bit is a realization we had in hindsight. So we started this company that I'll tell you a lot about. And what we didn't realize was the importance, oh, better? Yeah, okay, sorry. What we didn't realize was the importance of timing in this entire scheme, that we thought a good idea was a good idea, and that was a timeless truth, that it didn't matter if it was 2016 that we started it, or 2021, or 2011, and that's something that we learned just absolutely wasn't the case at all. So I want to flip through a couple slides here, and hopefully the picture base of the slides is entertaining enough, but if we could, oh, I have a clicker somewhere.
I can put it up there. A little black thing.
Oh, thank you. What am I pointing at? Okay. So when we started this company, as a quick background myself, I'm from Georgia. I went to Georgia Tech undergraduate, studied engineering, went into consulting for a few years, getting on a plane every Monday morning, coming off every Thursday night. I'm sure people in this room have faced that life at some point. I couldn't wait to get home on Monday night, and by home I mean back to the hotel, where I'd kind of change into my Nike dry fit shorts, go back down to the hotel lobby and keep working. If any of you have been in consulting, you probably can relate with that lifestyle. And I couldn't wait to just go put on those dry fit shorts with those socks and those tennis shoes, where I'd unlock a new level of productivity that I wasn't sitting around in a stiff suit all day in a tiny conference room, that I couldn't wait to go put that on. So one of the things that also struck me at the time was just being a fan of athletic clothing, being an athlete, being someone who just appreciated being outdoors, watching a lot of these companies have their clothing penetrate past the gym, past the field, and onto the street. So what you can see here is a trend that's called athleisure. So a lot of you might have seen this. It's a good excuse as to why I'm wearing Nike tennis shoes right now, or a Patagonia vest, is that a lot of these companies are starting to cater to people who want to wear this technology outside of the gym, outside of the field. So at the same time, this was what was happening in most of the conference rooms I was in, right? This level of performance that cotton was providing If you can't see, this guy has massive and really ugly pit stains, which is a gross and weird topic that most people just don't want to deal with. This guy included. This poor guy is the stock photo that comes up when you search sweat stains on Google. So I don't know where his career has taken him, but hopefully this isn't the peak right here. Or one of his buddies is just pranking him. But either way, it worked. And it gets to the point of saying, much like cotton running shorts are a relic of the past, now you can't even really find them anywhere, that our hypothesis is that this is the case too, that right now no one was solving this. So if we look back at what the design world was doing to solve any kind of issues or to progress the world forward, this is the stock image that comes up if you put runway in, or these are the three of them. And I suspect by the difference between what they're wearing and what people in this room are wearing, that they kind of missed the mark, and it's not uncommon for us to see this kind of stuff in our day-to-day life. And if any of you are in fashion, you might have come across stuff like this too. It's outrageous. I don't even know what the egg thing is on the right. But I can tell you that we quickly learned that the linear process that design was using in fashion right now wasn't right. People were going to a black room, taking inspiration from 20 or 30 years ago and cycling it right back through, and then putting it on shelves and liquidating it for an 8-week season, maybe sometimes 4-week seasons, putting it on heavy sales and then moving it off the rack. And so we said, well, that can't be the right solution. So we came on the market and said, we're engineers, why don't we take a different approach to this? Why don't we look at it from a different angle and say, what if we could apply that iterative design approach that engineers know so well and take it to fashion and say, let's talk to consumers, let's understand what those problems are, and let's actually engineer solutions. So ultimately it came down to this one burning point that looking sharp comes at a cost. You either aren't dressed for the entire day. We're in a generation that now loves work-life integration. This event being a fantastic example of that. A lot of you might have come from work and you might be going to dinner after this. You picked an outfit out this morning that was going to get you from 8 a.m. to midnight tonight. So if that was versatility, that you needed one outfit that would get you through that entire day, then what you see on the left is the discomfort in the moment, back to the guy in the sweat stains. So again, this is kind of where we actually started, and it probably wasn't the right starting point in hindsight, I'd be the first to admit. Where we should have started, we started with the dress shirt, with these pain points, understanding them. Where we should have started is here, and it's something that I'm more and more on the kind of parade of encouraging others to start at this point. And you won't necessarily know it at the offset, but the three trends that I've highlighted here that, again, in hindsight, worked in our favor and allowed us to get to the point we are. At this point, we're 4 years in, and we've made some good headway. But what we didn't know is that these four were brewing in the background and now have come to life. We saw kernels of them early on. It's what encouraged us. But at the same time, we didn't take time to really understand, is now the right time to do this? So the first one for us that came up was, I do like this laser pointer. It's not so bad. The athleisure movement, I talked about that a little bit. In 2010, 2011, when we were starting to pilot this, athleisure wasn't really a word. It was really just wearing, for guys, Under Armour polos in a boardroom when you probably shouldn't, and for women, it was wearing yoga pants at the office where, they weren't yet really accepted. And so it was really just jamming together the words athletic and leisure instead of actually creating a new category. The second movement we saw was this millennial lifestyle where much more than an age, it was a mindset. It was anyone with this kind of youthful mindset that said, hey, let's break the rules of the common 9 to 5. And let's go with a work-life integration where we don't just have to go home, pack two different outfits that one's 9 to 5 and one's 5 to 9. How do we bring those together in a way that we're doing right now? And at the same time, we started off in menswear, and we'll soon launch women's wear. But at the time, menswear was an important concept for us, where there was this idea of new masculinity. So Quartz at the bottom there calls it the Renaissance, where guys were picking a lot of their own garments out. And in the past 20 years ago, they might have picked out half of what was in their closet, and today they were picking out 80+%. So this idea that guys were being more intentional about their decisions about what kind of coffee they drank, what beer they drank, what they read, what they eat, where they work, this level of intentionality was permeating an entire generation, and in particular had an effect in menswear. So what I call is three mega trends that allowed us to exist right now. I'm more convinced than ever, if we had started this company in 2006, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. If we had started this company right now, I wouldn't be sitting here 5 years from now because of the convergence of those trends. At the same time, what underlies all these trends was a technology enabler that gets us to this point. 20 years ago, the fibers that Nike runs dry fit off of didn't exist. 20 years ago, the technology that we use to spin our socks in a 3D fashion didn't exist. And so a lot of these things that have come up to enable what we're doing today just fundamentally didn't exist. So when we talk about timing, there's an easier way to prove the point than saying, look at companies that are doing well and say, well, of course they're doing well. They kind of made their own timing. But I like to pull up these two examples when we talk about does it actually matter. And there's this great line that I read on this topic a while back, which was being early is the same as being wrong. And it's such a powerful line. It's probably a little bit irresponsible to say with such certainty, but at the same time, at least worth considering. There's two good examples on there that come to mind. So Ask Jeeves, a lot of people in the room probably used Ask Jeeves at some point. Ask Jeeves is actually just a bit ahead of its time. It ran on the same algorithms, it ran on the same logic that Google does today, but just didn't have the technology infrastructure behind it to get the search speed, to get the search volume, to get the search content that Google could when they came along. So poor Ask Jeeves, I don't know if they're still, I read somewhere that they're still a $500 million company, so I think they're probably doing okay on, they switched their business model and evolved. Webvan being another good example. Everyone here has probably heard of Postmates or Instacart or a number of local solutions that have popped up. Webvan spent billions at the dot-com boom building out this beautiful infrastructure for grocery delivery, and it failed miserably and probably lost a lot of people a lot of money, but it wasn't necessarily a bad idea. It's happening right now. But there's a quote right there from their spokesman. We believe we had a brilliant concept. We were just ahead of our time. So again, being early is the same as being wrong. I think at the same time, it's probably a little bit more obvious, but being late has the same effect. So coming back to it and saying, what did we learn in this process of, again, to some degree being a little bit fortuitous at the same time, perhaps there were subconscious effects of the kernels of those trends that actually affected us quite a bit. You can't possibly see the future, so we can have this conversation really easily in hindsight and say, look at these three macro movements that helped us to get to where we are. There's no way we could have actually made that slide 5 years ago, but we did see kernels of it. Had we been more intentional, perhaps it would have been avoided quite a few of the mistakes we made. The second one, if right now is the time to make this happen, you're probably too late. And if right now isn't the time, then was it in the past or is it in the future? And this is a point that's really close to our heart, is that you have to meet the market where it's going. We're still a blip on the radar of fashion right now. We spend most of our time thinking where we'll be in 2018, 2019. Where will the market be in 2018, 2019 when we are a major market player? What will the market look like? How do we meet it there? And then from there, how do we determine where it's going? So it's just this mindset of saying, what do we do? We don't plan for tomorrow. We don't plan for this year. We plan for the years afterwards. The third point up there is another one that's particularly relevant in fashion, but I suspect permeates a number of other industries, which is paying attention to macro trends, not micro trends. So sometimes getting caught up. I think the example of the cloud is such a good one, and saying you could have been this passing fad and saying, oh, put it on the cloud, but at the same time, the people who were able to foresee that 5 years before made a lot of good decisions, and centering infrastructure and big decisions around the cloud. It's here to stay. It's a mega trend. It may be replaced by something we can't foresee 10 years from now, but it's a mega trend. It's not a passing fad. So the equivalent for fashion, just to put it in context, would be micro trends are stuff like new gingham patterns and small changes in functionality. Mega trends would be changes in silhouettes. So slim fitting is in, or bell-bottom pants are in, versus skinny jeans. And those are the mega trends that we say. They'll be around for a few years at least. In fashion, mega isn't even that long. And the final point, I think this is one that hopefully maybe erases everything I've just said, which is that if you can't predict it or don't have any way to see what's coming, I can't possibly say this one loud enough, and it's what we did, which is just go out and do it and let the market figure it out. There are a number of ways to do that effectively. We did it on Kickstarter. We launched a 33-day campaign, actually about 4 months after I met Manny in 2012. We launched a Kickstarter campaign because we didn't know if the market actually cared about what we were doing. We built these beautiful prototypes. We were engineers, we were nerds, just sitting there over and over picking out great materials. We didn't know if anyone would care. And we posted this out on Kickstarter in June of 2012, and people cared. And it was good and it was fortunate, but we didn't spend $1, really any substantial money before that Kickstarter, because we put it out there and said, is the market ready? Does the market care? So I'd leave you with that last point, which is just to encourage. I know a lot of people here are starting great companies, and if when in doubt, just give it a shot, and the market will answer the question for you, but it is worth spending a little time. So that's all I've got. I think we hopefully have a little bit of time for questions. Is that right? No, it's a great question. The first thing we did when we were building out the company was map out what the existing process was, and it was a straight line, and it doesn't actually loop back around in any way, except for every few decades it loops back around in that way. So what we did is then took the traditional engineering approach and said, well, what if we kind of mapped that into it? So That means instead of starting with an inspiration, we start with how does your body expel heat, odor, moisture, pressure, strain. At the same time, there's a qualitative part, but there's also in fashion a heavy quantitative part, and there's a heavy qualitative part. If I asked you what your biggest issue was with dress socks today, you might not be able to tell me with any kind of specificity, but you can give me really general terms that I can go back, design solutions for, knowing the data that is behind your foot, how the skin of your foot stretches. I can take that data, take your input, and come out with a better solution. But then what I do is I come back around and I test it with you. So our process involves using field testers at every segment of the way to continue to course correct and to get something to market. Now, the second piece of it is saying, okay, but once it's on the market, that's not it, right? You don't just put it on the market. Now you've got a good product and wait, let it sell and go on. But much more like a car company than a fashion company, we keep our products on the market for 2 to 8 years is the intention, that it isn't a seasonal turn, right? That these pants are the 4th or 5th generation of a pair of pants that we conceived 3 years ago now. And by doing that, what we allow is we take all the feedback that comes in from those pants, which is hundreds and in some cases thousands of pieces of data. I blew out a hole in my sock. Here's a location. Here's a picture of it. We mine for that data. We codify that data and say, did it affect which function? Was it design, development, or production? Positive or negative? And then a number of subcategories that I won't bore you with, but we can articulate exactly, was this a statistically significant issue? We got 30 complaints that socks showed up with a hole in them, but we sent out 20,000 pairs. That's actually an acceptable level. It's not statistically significant, so let's move on. Some level of error will and should exist. If it doesn't, you're probably overpaying. So then circling that back around, saying how do we feed that back into each of those 3 functions, design, development, and production, to make sure that the product continues to get better, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So that was probably more than you bargained for in a design answer, but the intention is to close that loop so it's not just a linear process starting with an inspiration, ending with a sale rack. It's one where, I'm usually the first, particularly in these situations where we're far enough out of making the mistake to admit the mistake. But there's so a lot of this is what we do in terms of the engineering. So understanding, in this case, thermal ventilation, pressure mapping, and strain analysis are the key ones we use for the foot. There is actually a scientific process to test odor that I'll share with anybody that's actually interested. It's really gross. So then we look at the problems. We say, actually, odor was one of the most significant problems with socks, and say, how do we solve that? We use coffee, effectively washed coffee grounds, pharmaceutically treated, create activated carbon, infuse that into the fiber, and it sits right on your skin, so the bacteria that comes off of your foot can neutralize that odor. Then we come here and we talk about the 3D knitting process to actually bring a sock to life, so you can create a variable pattern on the foot to put padding where you want to step down and make it comfortable. So the answer to your question would, and 2 years ago, I would have answered it with this and saying, this is what makes us special. The IP that we file on this and the amount of money we've probably wasted filing patents on this is so silly in hindsight, in the sense that anybody can actually now take those 3 slides I made and make something that's 98% similar to what we made. Now, ideally, by that point, we've already made the next one, so that's okay. But at the end of the day, I think what we found out is exactly what you're saying, that all that matters is that the product is beautiful and people care. In fashion, it's still so deeply driven by, even in performance fashion, right? Even in Nike's case, it's still such an emotional decision that early on when we denied that, it was a big mistake, and it was one where we were a bunch of nerdy engineers saying, if we can just make the best performing dress shirt, people will buy it. And the nerdy people who bought it probably regret it. Manny's not in that group, but he did buy one. I hope he doesn't wear it anymore because it was really ugly. So yeah, it was just this learning that exactly right, brand equity is exactly what makes us special, and that we build the trust, and it's a trust that we kind of call out in this area. So if there's 2 dimensions we care about, it's performance and work appropriate. There are people at different corners of those, and that if we build trust in that top right corner, that we've built both engineering prowess but also a respect for fashion. That those are the 2 things that if there's 2 messages we want people to come away with, they trust that we took that time. Whereas if somebody, let's say Brooks Brothers launched a new brand that was performance aimed, no one would trust that they went and hired engineers. If Nike were to release a line of dress shirts, no one would trust that Nike went and hired a bunch of fashion people. And if they did, it would be more dilutive to Nike's greater brand as a performance brand anyway, so why would they want to? And Nike could go spend $80 to $100 million to go build a brand like that is a separate entity, but they'd rather just buy us. That's a really great question. It's one we've learned a ton from. Those mistakes are a little bit closer, so I'll water them down a little bit. Those still hurt. So we did, when we were experimenting with this in 2014, did pop-ups that were anywhere from, 2 hours long to 2 months long, size-wise, anywhere from 200 square feet to 2,000 square feet. We played a lot. Storefront.com we were using to go find these pop-ups. And so we were trying to figure out exactly what that model was, what our customer would respond to, what they would respect, and thought that we had to reinvent, this retail experience. We were putting coffee bars in all the shops, and we were putting couches in there. We still do a lot of that. But we were trying to recreate a retail experience that maybe actually wasn't as broken as we thought it was, where if we needed to excel on one dimension, it was make that product and the brand that goes with it beautiful, and then the rest just best in class, not necessarily first in class. So in terms of thinking of retail, that mindset also shifted from, is it just an acquisition model, a chance to educate and connect with the consumer, to can it actually drive revenue and be a significant portion of our business? The two shouldn't be mutually exclusive, but one has to rise to the top priority. And I'd say right now we're in a phase of shifting from the former to the latter, where we recognize that the acquisition portion will be natural, but let's not think of it as a loss leader. Let's make sure it's an equally sound part of the business. So in that way, we had 3 stores last year. We let one short-term lease end in New York where it was a loss leader, a great brand builder, a great acquisition tool, but not actually contributing to the bottom line. So let it go. Versus our San Francisco and Boston store have really strong and profitable economics. Let's keep those, and let's double down on that model where they have the auxiliary effect of customer acquisition, but are driven by making sure it's a strong economic decision. I think our general fear in life always has and always will be reliant upon outside capital. So how can we stand on our own 2 feet? God, you guys are picking all the scabs right now. Yeah. So it's been about 3.5 years. We've taken on about $7 million in outside investment over the course of several different tranches, several different milestones. A couple of things that we've learned over the course of that. Early on, it was much easier to raise money because we were selling a dream pre-revenue. We were at the Trust Center at MIT where we met Manny, and it was really easy to convince people that we were this crazy group of MIT engineers out there trying to challenge fashion. It was a much sexier message. After that, the validation came from the traction, so that became easier, right? Today, we're raising a convertible note, and it shouldn't be as difficult because we've got the traction behind us. There's an awkward teenage phase in between there that I often glaze over because it wasn't very much fun, where you're post-dream but pre-traction. And so I always encourage people when they're building out their financing strategies to think about, you get that round to sell a dream, and that first time afterwards where you're post-revenue, to be ready to have great numbers to show, because you're no longer selling a dream, you're selling traction at that point. And so the conversation shifted, the types of investors shifted, the types of people we were talking to shifted, but hopefully the story, the why, and we were talking about this earlier, but that kind of deeper, timeless why didn't shift, and that was what we could stay strong on.
And that's why looking at the macro trends are so critical. So a lot of the trends that kind of I highlighted, the people that take the best advantage are people that are technology or use technology enabled, right? So what I would do is just realize there's a couple of things. One is just realize that there's some massive macro trends that I just highlighted from a technology standpoint. So let's just break you up into 2 groups, right? One group would be kind of, my technology entrepreneur or business person and so forth, right? So I want to use technology to sell something better. So just realize that when you think about cloud, mobility, and analytics, Aman talked a lot about analytics. So one of the things that we're finding is that the companies that do really well use analytics to make that happen. So once you understand that there's these major trends, think about what you are most passionate about. Because here's kind of both our fundamental feeling. Right now, there's such a sea wave of innovation. Like, I don't know if you saw the Economist, I think a couple of issues back. They had this person's head, I think it's Einstein's head, exploding, and you saw like the hoverboard, you got all these innovations that are happening. It was fashion, food, everything. So, I talked briefly about the technology things, right? So whatever you're really passionate about, really look at it and saying, how's the world, if I think about cloud mobility and analytics or use any of those things or subset of that, how can I make this world better for the consumer or whatever, right? And you will find one. Because, that's why when I hand it over to Aman, it's like, the time is now. I mean, I see so much innovation opportunities, it's crazy, okay? So that's the first one. The second thing is this innovation is changing. Because remember one of the things I said with this technology of data and so forth, the way people live, the patterns of life is changing. And Aman's kind of talking about that. You know, he's like the millennial life, right? The whole convergence of work and so that's due to the mobile phone and the apps and so forth. I mean, I remember this is like years ago as a consultant, I was flying back and they're saying the disappearance of private and personal time, right? And how technology was supposed to help your life, but then it invaded your life, right? Personal and it just converged. The millennials were the first group that kind of grew up in that environment, okay? So what I would say is if you're on the other side, on the consumer side, really think about how are these technologies changing the way people buy, search, and so forth. And that will give you some insights in terms of where the opportunities are. But right now, it's a really exciting time because the amount of opportunities that are out there, we were talking about Tesla, we're talking about SpaceX. I mean, SpaceX, when they did something, I mean, NASA told these guys that you could not launch a stage 1 and it do a flip and land at the same time in 10 minutes. They said, it's impossible. You had a bunch of analytic guys doing doing this stuff, and they figured it out. It's an amazing time. So I wouldn't say, how do you figure it out? Figure out what you're passionate about. Think about these major trends and really figure out how you could change that piece of the world that you're the most passionate about. And then test it out. You think, I think this is a great idea. First, ask your friends and family. First ask your spouse and say, do you think it's a great idea? Don't take it with a grain of salt. They might say yes or no, but and then talk to your friends, and then go to Kickstarter. It doesn't cost you anything, You do have to spend a lot of time thinking it through. Post it. People will either invest or whatever, you know what I mean? And they'll give you a vote of confidence. So there's a lot of vehicles, a lot of crowdsourcing, and allow you to test at a low cost.
Yeah, I would echo all of that, and I think that's a fantastic kind of thought process for that early stage when you're just starting to conceive this idea. I think one of the other kind of thoughts is as you get to that idea point, you're saying, okay, now we're there and we want to test out, is now the right time? This isn't a particularly sophisticated answer, and again, this is why I shouldn't follow Charles, but guess, taking the time to actually sit down and say what is happening, read articles. I mean, I think for us, there are industry magazines, Business of Fashion being a great one, where we can see trends that they might not call it out as a mega trend, but if the word athleisure shows up in 10 issues in a row, it's probably got some legs now. Do we think that's got staying power? Let's guess. I think what our regret was not taking that time to go and take those educated guesses and act upon them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that if we had done it, we would have either doubled down or shut down shop, depending on what that guess said, but course correct a little bit. I mean, I think the example I could give there was that we would have probably spent a lot less time going down the wholesale path, trying to sell to, let's say, Nordstrom's, had we taken the time to do this exercise up front and watch the emergence of direct-to-consumer coming up around us and saying, what if, well, we kind of accidentally ignored that, and had we just embraced that, we probably would have opened up stores a year or two before. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a deal breaker once you see those mega trends, but just playing with them. It was 4 years ago now, so I'll scratch my memory a little bit, but this was in 2012. I think one of the biggest myths we found in Kickstarter that I think a lot of people held as they approached Kickstarters is that there's anything organic or viral about it. It's sheer effort. I mean, we would just constantly collect email addresses, collect press, get people excited about it. We would go to EDP and sit there and hawk terrible shirts for hours while we waited for sessions to get out. It was just a lot of hustle and sweat. At the same time, I think what we coupled that with was a single consumable, really easy to grab tagline, and not necessarily tagline, but in the sense we didn't actually publish this tagline, but MIT meets fashion, and it wasn't, or it was, the other one we used a lot was kind of NASA's spacesuits impacting fashion, and so those two lines, while not necessarily representative of the entire business or getting to the why, at least were really easy for people to consume and kind of get interested in. So that helped, certainly from a PR standpoint, but it also helped start a lot of conversations. Then we could see that early growth to where I think we had a goal in the first 24 hours of hitting 10K. Our goal was 30K for the whole thing. We had a goal of 10K in the first 24 hours. And we hit it by just muscling through it, by literally calling up and being like, hey, Dad, what are you doing right now? How about that $500 you were, not planning on using today? and seriously, and just kind of muscling our way through it. And then we caught, then after there was 3 founders and 5 interns, which is a bizarre ratio that I don't know why they would have agreed to. And so all 8 of us were sitting there posting into our social networks, making phone calls, at a big launch party. So it was a true kind of effort. Now, from there was certainly some momentum that we could pick up and carry on, and saying we had the entire 33-day span planned out for every day, what stretch milestones, or a different press article, or a different social push, or a different event that we were hosting. So kind of making sure that we would maintain that momentum, not just kind of say like, all right, we put it up, now let's see what happens. So a lot of effort. People have done it much better than us since then, but it was an interesting time. Well, we were just having a conversation with a couple other founders about this conversation, because there's not an easy answer. I think there's a lot of noise out there in terms of who's providing this stuff, and I can speak specifically to us, where we're a direct-to-consumer, 2/3 e-commerce, 1/3 brick and mortars. We've got a good mix, a little bit of wholesale in there. But so with all those channels, with all these different, each of those channels started at different times. Each of them started on different platforms than they are today. It's a mess. If you mapped out where all of our data is, there's probably 30 different names that would come up somewhere in there. So there's kind of 2 choices. One is just embrace the last 3 months where there's been consistency, and use the ingrown, opportunities of, let's say, Google Analytics, let's say inside of Shopify, they've got their own analytics, bring all that together. Or 2, the second option is trying to use data aggregators like RJ Metrics, I think Stitch Labs. There's a number of different players out there, Lettuce apps, that'll pull all of your information into one place. We had started going down that route, but for 2 reasons stopped. One is that because the data is kind of messy, you lose trust in it. And 2 is that data from anything more than like 6 months ago is fairly irrelevant to us at this point anyway. So let's just embrace what we got with the last 3 months. So we tend to boil it down to as few metrics as we can. So right now we've got 6 metrics, and they're all that matter. Now, if one of those metrics is exceeding or below our expectations, then we'll do more manual exercises to peel back the onion and figure out what's wrong with them. But instead of trying to monitor, at RJ Metrics, when we had an account with them, and we think very highly of them, we had an account with them, we had probably 150 metrics throughout that were just insanely and unnecessarily detailed, that then meant, 1, we lost trust in it, and 2, we stopped paying attention to it and taking action on it. So I think simple and recent/relevant were probably the takeaways that we came from a number of missteps. Any other thoughts on analytics?
Yeah, so the cool thing about analytics is that there's actually a lot of cool tools. There's a cool tool called Rev, where you can actually, because one of the key questions a lot of people have is, you got all these different data from different things. How do you make sure it's clean and make sure that it makes sense? Because you can run a lot of analytics, but if it's not clean, you get junk. And then if you use machine learning or anything that's more sophisticated, then it compounds the mistake. So it's really bad. So cleaning becomes really important. So Informatica, which is a big data company, has a do-it-yourself data cleansing and integration tool called Rev. It's a really amazing product. And the trial, I think you can get for a couple of months for free to check out some data and so forth. So you should check that out. Rev, R-E-V. R-E-V.
That's usually the opposite question. I was so ready for the other side of that question. Yeah.
Oh, you want to go first? Or? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's advice, because as an entrepreneur, you need to own everything. But there's a lot of mistakes, that you learn from. I would say there's a couple of things that I found. One is really try to get in touch with the market versus forcing things. Because I mean, if you look at Webvan, a lot of things, I see that. I'm like, I know this is there, so you try to force it. And when you force things, it's kind of like Taoism, right? You got to flow with where the market and trends are going. If you don't force it and you try to move forward, then you start to understand, and learn and adapt. So that's one of the first things I learned. I remember when I was, some of my earlier companies, I would just force it. I mean, my board of directors like, Charles a good CEO, because you tell him to go, but he's got some problems. It's like, well, what's his problem? It's like, well, you tell him to go over there, and he'll just blow through the wall. He won't look for the door, So that's one of the key things that I remember. Don't try to force it. Try to really get in tune with the marketplace. So that's one. I
have a well-prepared answer that I've been thinking about for months now. So we made some mistakes early on with hiring, and I think thinking back to why that was, it was a lot of advice. So we always think of performance in two lenses. One is the actual role performance. Are they good at executing on what that job description is? And two is the working culture. Do they work in a way that embraces our company's values? And I think early on it was this idea, and there's this momentum in Boston and Cambridge to find rock stars and find these people who had just killed it and were just gunning for the top. They were former partners at these beautiful consulting firms. They were going to come in and execute and go find this talent. And I think what we found out is that the people who thrived in our culture the best and actually as a result produced the strongest results were the opposite. They weren't necessarily experts in their field, but they were totally on the bus. We said we'd rather have a 100%. So we'd rather have 100% buy-in on an 80% plan than an 80% buy-in on a 100% plan. And I think that's where it came to life that our recruiting process changed from a case interview. We used to start with a case interview. It was really tough and it weeded a lot of people out, to a coffee meeting just to kind of check the box, to now we start off with the first round is actually dinner or lunch, get to know the person. Is this someone who we would want to be around, who's excited about what we're doing, who kind of connects with us in a way? It's not necessarily personality, but values. And then we do the case interviews. So you still have to have that performance, but much more forgiving there. If someone kills it on a role performance, on a working culture, and is trainable on doesn't have a big ego to let their guard down, then they can kind of catch up pretty quickly from a role perspective.
So I just want to piggyback a little bit on Aman's concept of people, right? Because a startup or a company, the people become so critical. So piggyback on it, there are three things that I remember from all my startups. One is never go for a B player. It's better to have a spot open and you do the work than fill a spot with a B player. Always go with an A player. Because when you get a B player, you're going to spend more time trying to tell them how to do it, and you're going to be telling them that multiple times. So that's one. The second thing is what I would always say is when you actually interview people, I look for three things. Are they smart, are they driven, and are they nice? So those are the three things I look for. So when I think about smart, when we do programmers or salespeople, we always ask them like some quick questions to see if they're smart enough. And they don't have to be brilliant, but they have to be smart enough, right? Then in terms of are they able to drive, one of the things we ask them to do is the homework. If you're a salesperson, we'll tell them to say, go back, the final interviews, come back to us with a sales plan and pitch it to us like I'm head of sales or whatever. And that has always been really helpful because most people just kind of like take their word for it. They don't get a sample of their work. If you're a programmer, I ask my programmers to give them like a code that's really hard to fix, and then they'll give them and then say, okay, fix it. Come, bring it back to me, and they'll take a look at it and says, yeah, it's okay, it's great, or whatever. So actually getting them to do a piece of the work has always been helpful. And the last piece is, do you like them? Is a nice person? Would you be willing to be stuck in a storm with them, right? So. And that becomes important, You're like, hey, Storm, if you're like, yeah, great, let's go have fun. Or like, Storm, oh my God, I'm stuck with this guy, right? So you don't want that. So that becomes a really important part. So I just want to kind of support what Aman was saying. But Aman,
you guys have storms here? Paradise? Right? My view of Puerto Rico is the last 8 hours, which is just paradise. So. The answer to your question, I think, comes back to that cyclical design process. We, in a very cheap and tactical way, we just ask people. It's helpful from a risk standpoint that we don't make things people don't want, and it's helpful from a brand building standpoint that's what our brand stands for, is that we don't just put stuff that hasn't been validated on the markets. We validate through field testers when we have prototypes. We validate through a private community online that can take 4 or 5 different design options and tell us which one resonates with the issue we're trying to solve.
So that was substitute the traditional research-focused groups.
Substitute or supplement, yeah. Yeah, no, when we didn't at that point have, labs and formal process, we didn't have right now we've got this great community, it's called Ministry Supply Labs. It's a couple hundred people that are fairly representative of our entire audience. We can put up 3 pictures or 3 colors and say, which one of these would you buy? And we now know that the color distribution to place the PO for. We can say, here's 3 designs, which one of these do you like? And we get comments, not just check boxes. But before we had all that, it kind of goes back to the Kickstarter mentality of saying, from the qualitative standpoint, we would find hundreds and hundreds of people, and we would just go and ask and have little mini focus groups, little questions, answers, and we would record it. Now, what we would try to do is turn that data into actual information, so we would categorize it, we would understand it, and say, what is it actually telling us? From a quantitative standpoint, we actually just licensed time at labs, and we went to the Sports Technology Institute in Portugal, and they were happy to have us. They were excited, and we said, hey, this is what we're trying to do. Can we sit here and, we've got tons of videos of just our feet kind of rolling over and over with a strain analysis machine, understanding how your skin's stretching. So what can we take away from that, and let's go draw it back out. So there's a lot of resources out there that don't require you to go buy all this fancy equipment or take the most formal route to still get to the same general truths that actually drive what we're doing today and what will drive us for women's wear too.